Always mind your surroundings.
Hi, this is Michael Uslan. You're listening to Batman on Film.
Talking about the tales where the shadows crawl. Chapter by chapter, we've covered it all. From the capes and cows to the darkest night. Every film, every fight, a fan's delight. Turn the page, Gotham's glory awaits. Batman on film, where legends create. Oh, we ride through the Gotham skies. From the bat's rise to the villain's eyes. Turn the reels where the story is bright. I'm Batman on film, the legends alive. Break down the madness, scene by scene, where the city's pulse and our dreams convene. From the old to the new, the saga unfolds. A vigilante sail in the echoing cold. Step into Gotham where justice earns. Through words and whispers, the bat returns. Oh, we ride through the Gotham skies. From the bat's rise to the villain's eyes. Turn the reels where the story is bright. I'm Batman on film, the legend's alive. Pages turn as the saga unfolds. Join the journey in this timeless quest. Batman on film stands above the rest. Oh, we ride through the Gotham skies. From the bat's rise to the villain's eyes. Turn the reels where the story is bright. I'm Batman on film, the legend's alive.
Welcome to Chapter 2 of Batman Begins, a Batman on Film podcast celebrating the 20th anniversary of Christopher Nolan's game-changing film. I'm senior contributor Javi Trujillo, and joining me today is a Bat scholar who longtime BOFers are familiar with, the co-host of the Comic Binge and its sub-series Nights Never Die, as well as the podcast Discovery Debrief, BOF legacy contributor Mr. Chris Clow. How are you today, Captain?
Hey, hanging it in there, my friend. Thank you for the invitation. It's always good to come home to BOF.
It's always good to have you. That's how we talked about this on Batman Animation. Like, that's how I knew of you, was from Batman on Film back in the day. So it's been a privilege to have an association with BOF, particularly for next year is going to be my 20th year being in the orbit of BOF. I mean, obviously my dedicated involvement has waxed and waned a lot during that time, but it's always it's always nice to come home to BOF. And I mean, God, it exposed me to so many friends that I have that I truly value. So an invaluable initial connection. So thanks to Bill Ramey once again for bringing me into the fold. He saw something, so I appreciate it. Did. Well, before we dive into the episode proper, tell me about your first experience of seeing Batman Begins. Was it at the cinema?
It was. It was actually the last day of my junior year in high school, and living. Well, hey, we're 20 years post tense now, you know. So I was 17, and I lived for a long time. I lived in a very small town, about 5 minutes from the Canadian border. It's about as northwest as you can get in the Pacific Northwest. So
the regular theater that I had access to stateside was not a particularly modern complex. However, there was a great stadium style theater just over the border that also had an IMAX screen. It is a LIMAX
Ooh,
screen, but it's still an IMAX screen.
yeah.
So that was always my first choice, like really from like early high school onward. If I was going to go to a movie that I was really looking forward to, I would always try to get tickets there to watch it. I saw both Matrix sequels in that IMAX theater. I saw Superman Returns there on opening day, and it was weird because it was like the shift between 3D and not 3D. So it would flash the glasses, and you would have to put them on before the select 3D sequences.
Right. I
Yeah,
remember that now. I forgot.
yeah, is a little unusual. Nowadays after post Avatar, they either go all in or nothing,
Yeah.
So it was a weird half measure, but it was still, a good time. And then yeah, but before Superman Returns, of course, was the first screening that I went to for Batman Begins. It was a pretty I didn't go to a midnight showing or anything because I had school the next day. So we went at like 3 p.m. on opening day, I think, or maybe a little bit later. I went with my brother and his girlfriend at the time, and a lot of anticipation going into it. I, of course, had been reading BOF excessively. Was not quite associated with the site yet, so it's not like I could just like ask Bill about what he was going to be writing about. I was just tuning in and seeing what was going on. And I mean, I think all of us got a sense that this was going to be a different and special movie. I mean, the
Yeah.
thing that really pushed that forward for me was the very first look we got at the Tumblr. That's when I realized, oh, this is going to a whole new place compared with what we've seen before. And then the trailers, of course, solidified things. But coming into the movie and then walking out of the movie, I was not the same person I was when I went in. Um, and like that is to this day one of my favorite cinematic experiences was seeing that movie for the first time. I, in the past, have credited that movie with rekindling my love of the comics medium. That's the thing that really pushed me back into reading the monthlies on a regular basis for the first time since I was a kid. I had checked in with things, but not nearly to the degree that I would in the years following. And it did that with a few people that I know just in my own social circle. So in that respect, it was extremely influential just on me as a fan, but obviously it's an extremely influential movie on superhero cinema, on how you can take these stories uh, with more emotional realism, like beyond just like the physical realism that we see in Batman Begins. The emotional realism is what hits me the hardest, I think. It
Yeah.
just felt so real in terms of how people would react and respond to the kinds of things that are happening in it. And you don't really have an abundance of emotional realism outside of a few select instances in the first four Burton Schumacher movies, really. Um, but this movie was just absolutely spectacular. I still love it to death. And I can believe that it's 20 years old because a lot of things have happened between now and then, but I sympathize and empathize with people who feel like it snuck up on them, the 20th anniversary. But so much has happened since this movie, and
It,
a lot of other
yeah.
movies owe this movie so much. It feels like the grandfather of the genre today. I think.
Like conceptually, I understand all that. Like we've had 3 solo Batman movies since then and a whole other Batman doing crossover movies sandwiched in between that. But it's weird to me to think that that was 2 decades ago, that somebody would consider this to be an old movie now instead of a modern one, you
Sure.
know? So, it just I don't know, it hits me in a weird spot because to me, it still feels like, maybe it came out like 5 years ago. Like, it doesn't seem like it should be that old. Um, because like you, like, I just have so many, like, clear memories of seeing it and going to Target looking for the toys and waiting for every new trailer and all that. So it's weird to think that that was that long ago. So you sound pretty hyped. Like you went to a whole nother country to go see it, you know? Here we are 20 years later. Where does it fall amongst your favorites?
It's pretty high up there, but it was supplanted by The Dark Knight in my mind.
Okay.
Um,
You're one
just
of those
because
people.
I am one of those
You're one
people,
of
and I
those
know.
Lauer type of people.
Well, I mean, hey, that's good company to be in. I'll take it.
Yeah,
But
oh, totally.
I mean, the folks who feel that Begins is a better movie or maybe the best example of the Dark Knight trilogy, I would not begrudge anybody for thinking or believing that. I mean, it's like choosing between your favorite children, really. Like these
Yeah.
movies are the top tier of the entire superhero genre of cinema. Um, I put a lot of personal value on the rivalry between Batman and the Joker. So the fact that just a few years later, we got what to me remains the purest cinematic representation of all of the dynamics of that conflict.
Mhm.
That's what pushes that movie over the top for me.
I
I
get
mean,
that.
it challenges him on so many different levels, and he has to deal with that challenge in different ways based on the situations that he's approaching it. Joker doesn't even know that he's challenging Bruce Wayne, but Bruce has to deal with things when he's not in the mask directly related to what the Joker was doing to him while he was Batman, on top of the actual conflict between the two heightened personalities themselves. So Dark Knight remains my favorite of the Dark Knight trilogy, but Batman Begins is a close second. Having said that, though, in terms of the genre at large, few movies have done it better than Batman Begins. Anything going back to, let's say, the beginning of this real renaissance of superhero cinema, going back to at least Blade or X-Men, Batman Begins is easily in the top five of all the superhero movies that we've had since then.
Yeah.
Maybe top three. So I love this movie a lot. I've seen this movie a lot. I was obsessively watching it. Um, but yeah, I mean, I respect people who prefer this movie over the other ones, but um, for me, the Batman Begins provided the essential building blocks to get to what for me remains the pinnacle of Batman cinema.
It's a great answer. Well, we are here today to discuss chapter 2, which I am calling Always Mind Your Surroundings. And it starts at the 11-minute 34-second mark and ends at the 19-minute 45-second mark. So we start with the Waynes taking a trade ride into Gotham, with Thomas explaining the city to Bruce and the audience. How did you like how the exposition was handled and how they blended Thomas Wayne, the doctor, with the day-to-day of Wayne Enterprises?
As someone who had not really jumped back into the comics yet at this point, I was really taken with the way that the movie presented all of this information because being smarter than the average bear at 17 when it comes to Batman mythology, like I was well aware of the reality of Dr. Wayne's status as a surgeon and a practicing doctor. And you also have this corporate entity that serves as the foundation of Bruce Wayne's fortune later. So the comics, have done different things to explain how those dynamics work together. In a movie context, this was really efficient and it gets things out of the way where the company is more of just like an incidental reality of Thomas Wayne's life. And it communicated that really quickly. And you also get a really unique look at the character of Gotham itself. To me, this was the moment where the oft discussed realism of the movie really shines through because this is a city in a visual language that looks precisely like the visual language that we actually see when we look out our windows. Like, I understand the appeal of a hyper stylized vision of Gotham like we got from Anton First, but there is something to be said about feeling like it's a place that you can travel to,
Yeah.
that makes it feel so much more real. And the train ride does a really effective job of not only making Gotham feel like a real place, but also setting up for later the degradation that it will undergo by the time Batman is ready to put the mask on for the first time. So, as like just an efficient delivery mechanism of a lot of good information that's valuable to the story, it's great. It gets the job done very, very well.
And we all come into Batman from different points of view and different periods of the character's history. And it was always kind of vague to me how the Waynes had all this money and Wayne Enterprises. But then his dad was a doctor. Like, how did the two things happen to coexist? And I thought they did a really good job of introducing an audience to what those parameters were and how, Thomas says he leaves it to better men or more interested men. So I thought that was a fun acknowledgement of, the continuity and not something that I've ever really been clear about reading the books. Because it seems like for like current comics, like Batman is only or Bruce is only the head of the company whenever it suits the plot. Otherwise, you just assume Lucius is doing his thing running. Well, actually, Lucius doesn't even work there anymore. I don't even know if Bruce does at this point. I don't remember. So, anyways, the scene shifts to the Waynes now at the opera, and Bruce gets very uncomfortable with the imagery on the stage, notably the bat-like iconography that triggers a panic attack. And Thomas covers for his son's uncomfortableness, and they leave early. Like, how good a dad is he?
Yeah, very good. This was, I think, one of the more consequential moments when I initially watched it and in the subsequent years where I've revisited it. Because I know that there are probably some folks, let's say rigidly minded folks, who remain ambivalent toward the idea that he's not going to see the Mark of Zorro, right? Um,
Something we're gonna
and
touch on a little bit, yeah.
sure, yeah,
Yeah,
but like setting it up with the opera, and I mean, as a Batman fan, you know what's coming, right?
yeah.
Um, when Bruce started to have trouble, like initially I was kind of like, I wonder why they changed this. Why isn't it the movie? Why are they going to the opera? It's odd. And then you realize like what it's going to set up before the scene is even over. This added dimension of guilt that is likely to result from this. Even before they stepped out into the alley, I realized the narrative value of making a change like that and what it would mean for the way that Bruce is going to process the trauma of what's about to happen. So it did its job as an embedded Batman fan of putting a pit in my stomach well before we even heard any shots ring out.
And I think in the time since that's passed, we've seen, a dirtier Thomas Wayne, be it in the Joker movie, uh, the Telltale games have played with how good he was as a human being. Batman Damned certainly showed a darker side to him, and it's even been called into question in, like, runs like Grant Morrison's, so it's nice no one's perfect, and we tend to, lionize someone when they pass, but I like at the bones of it, like, you can see that he was a good dad. He was as present as he could be with his son, and it wasn't, you know, he wasn't off just working full time as a doctor. Like, you can see why Bruce valued his loss so much. The only downside to that is we don't really get to know this Martha and what influence that she had on him. Um, but beyond that, like, you get a good sense of his character. And to your point, it's been long established that the Waynes were murdered coming out of the movies, but it was really like Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns that added the mark of Zorro to it. And that fact is kind of stuck in various iterations, or maybe they've modified it, like in the Joker, where it was Zorro the Gay Blade instead of the Mark of Zorro, because that was period appropriate. Um, but take me back to 2005. Like, how was that change to the legend taken at the time? with it being the opera and not the movie. I don't remember if there was any fervor.
In a pre-Twitter world,
Yeah,
my exposure to fervor was very limited. Like, I didn't really encounter any issues that people had with it really until a couple of years later when I was behind the counter at a comic book store where an occasional fan over a period of 7 years might have mentioned that they didn't like that change. I think for the most part, because the movie was so good and
yeah,
generally universally praised as being good, that overrode a lot of the general sentiment that some fans might have to sort of poo-poo it. Um, like I said, I mean, the movie made its case for why it went in that direction for me very clearly with the emotional impact that the moment would have on the characters and on Bruce in particular. You know, this was really the time where, after being generally concerned with the trend of Batman movies focusing on everybody but Bruce Wayne, this made very clear that this is Bruce Wayne's movie.
yeah.
And that immediately just like made me okay with it. You know, as long as we get to the same destination regarding who he is, what he's about, what drives him, what defines Batman, um, then I was going to be okay with it. And that's, in my estimation, what the movie provided exactly. So playing around with the route to get to that ultimate heroic destination, the details don't bother me as much as the emotional reality of sticking true to who we understand this guy to be. So I feel like the fervor was muted. Had social media been around with the ubiquity that it has today, maybe we would have a different perception, but thankfully it wasn't. So,
Yeah, and it's one of those things too where it also depends on just I feel like you become more inflexible over a certain course of time.
mhm.
And when I was 12, when Batman 89 came out and the Joker killed his parents, like it wasn't a big deal to me that it wasn't Joe Chill, you know? Like it didn't phase me at all. I didn't even really think about it critically. But I mean that could have just been because I was 12. But then, go forward 5 years to Zero Hour and they retcon out Joe Chill. I'm like, "Oh, I like the Joe Chill version because I remember reading those old, like, 40s and 50s comics where they have those reveals, and with Batman 89, they had the serial and the Untold Legend of Batman got reprinted, and I knew that story, so I was kinda bummed about that. So, having had these different iterations now, when we came to this, like, for me personally, it didn't really phase me. In anything, it made me like it more. I don't think we've ever talked about this. Like, I've had, um, what I guess I would now call panic attacks or anxiety as a child. Didn't know really what it was. I just thought I was scared. And, like my parents, I would go spend the night at my cousins, and half the time I would freak out and they would have to come and get me, or at certain movies as well. So we were 1982. My dad was having to work away from home for a while, and we went to stay with him in Salt Lake City for like a month. And um, we were going to go see Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. And I was all excited to go because they promised me that if I sat through the whole movie, they were going to buy me this Admiral Kirk 3 3/4 inch Mego action figure that we saw at Kmart. So we go into the movie, and like I got like 2 minutes into it and was just starting to freak out. And they had to take me out and had to get our money back. And I didn't get the action figure. And it was basically because our neighbor below us in the apartment had, told me about the whole earworm thing that crawls in the ear, and that it freaked me out enough to where I couldn't handle it. So flash forward 20 years later to this movie, and I'm like, oh, I felt like this connection with Bruce Wayne in a way I hadn't before, because he was going through something that I had done myself as a child, just without the tragedy of of leaving the theater afterwards. All I didn't get was a Star Trek figure. I still have my parents, which I think I won out there. But
Yeah, that's
also,
that.
no,
Oh,
go ahead.
I was just going to say that's really interesting because I'm sure there were a lot of people who watched Batman Begins for the first time, and they might go in with a perception of the character being a hyper masculine figure of stoicism,
Mhm.
and then adding this additional dimension of having to deal with that fear. I'm sure that was a key relating point for a lot of people who maybe, I mean, despite Batman's popularity, there are still people who do not like him. So maybe for some people, this could have been an in to getting a little bit of a deeper understanding of what makes him tick without even like the litmus test for introducing potential changes to a long-standing character with as much publication history as Batman has. You know, sometimes people can react, let's say, adversely to even minor changes in his characterization. But when you're introducing this additional layer in his formation that informs the countenance that he has when we know he's operating as Batman, that just enriches the entire experience and it enriches the character more broadly too. So I would like to think that I mean, if you could relate that to a direct experience you had as a child, hopefully that was not isolated. I hope other
Yeah.
people were able to do the same thing.
And I think that's why this one resonates for me over the rest of the trilogy, because like you said, like, this one of the 3, this one is the most Bruce Wayne story,
Yeah.
and, as time has gone by, like, yeah, maybe The Dark Knight technically is better, um, and I appreciate and love Rises too, but there's something about the focus on Bruce Wayne. It's more present in this film than in the other ones because you have all the other elements and subplots as well.
Yeah.
Um, and I like too how it carries forward this theme of fear and overcoming fear, and like we talked about last chapter, why do we fall? And we see Batman or Bruce go through all that and face his fears and overcome them. And that's something that really struck me with the character at that time in my life when this trilogy came out, coincided with Grant Morrison's Batman run and facing insurmountable obstacles, and also rediscovering Batman the Cult. He's like, I didn't become Batman to fight crime. I did it to overcome the fear. And like that ties in nicely with what we see Bruce go through in this movie. Um, and and we see in this version, like, Thomas is trying to calm down Joe Chill during the robbery to no avail. And we've seen so many iterations of this now across various media, between the Gotham TV show, the aforementioned Telltale games, variations of it in the Arkham series. Where does this version of it rank for you? And what does Nolan bring to it that you don't see in the other iterations?
A viscerality, I think, is what he brings to it in comparison to other folks. It just feels very rugged in a way that is appropriate for a street level vigilante. There is a huge sort of crashing to earth that Bruce experiences in this iteration that I think the movie does a really effective job of setting up. Not that Bruce is a brat or anything, but I mean, he
Yeah.
does live a very charmed life as you would expect someone of his familial resources to have, right? But
Yeah.
the crash that comes from this scene is very pronounced. And I think the emotional impact of the way that it's portrayed is unique to Batman Begins. In terms of favorites, like, I don't know. I think my favorite version of at least a depiction of the pivotal moment of Batman's origin is probably in Arkham Asylum in the video game, because you can't replicate the interactive element um, in in a movie watching environment or even in a comic. You know, a comic can get a little bit
Mhm.
closer because you're in the heads of the characters, but there is something about that scene where Batman is experiencing the hallucination that takes him back to his defining moment, and walking through that, and hearing things ringing in your ears, as you're making your way through a hallway that morphs into crime alley, and what is coming. That also put a pit in my stomach until the moment that it happened. But there was also what it had in Arkham Asylum that I think is missing from Batman Begins, and you can't really do it. It's not something that I hold against Batman Begins. It's
Mhm.
just something that I feel like Arkham Asylum has a leg up on. The sense of, God, how do I put it? I think it's a feeling that most big Batman fans get when you know that he is confronted with this debilitating challenge that seeds his ability to overcome it. Like that he is going to overcome it. And the moment in Arkham Asylum where he is kneeling down at his parents and the signal shines over all of them, that to me still just gets my blood pumping as a Batman fan in a way that this one doesn't. This one is probably the most effective at the horror that comes from a moment like this. And
Yeah.
like I said, the viscerality. I mean, it's not even a particularly bloody scene, but it feels bloody in a weird way. Um, but in terms of just like hitting the Batman is coming button really hard, I think Arkham Asylum edges it out for me personally, but that's not designed to take away from the power of the
Yeah.
scene generally. This is a really effective depiction of his origin.
Didn't they touch on it too in Arkham City or Arkham Origins, like going to Crime Alley itself?
Yes, when
Okay,
you
I think I'm mixing the 2 together right now.
yeah, so in Arkham Asylum, you're not actually in the city, right? You are on Arkham Island, and at various points throughout the story, you're afflicted with Scarecrow's fear toxin, and it causes different kinds of hallucinations. And the moment that I just referenced is when he is struck with a hallucination, walking through a long hallway, and the hallway seems to extend, and he turns a corner, and all of a sudden he sees like fans that would be well placed on the side of an apartment building. Then street lights show up and it just morphs into crime alley. And he's forced to relive that moment. And you're turned into a young boy walking down that alley. And it's just huge sense of dread. In Arkham City, the Scarecrow is not present. So, but one of the elements of the city that was overtaken by Hugo Strange as the Arkham City facility was Crime Alley, was where the actual murder
Okay.
took place. And when you walk to the scene of the crime, the audio changes and you start hearing the shots ringing out. And there's this like obfuscated dreamlike quality to the sound, and it pumps into a surround system, so it's all around you, and you hear the shots ring out, and you can kneel down and pay your respects at the outline of Thomas and Martha Wayne that's still there for some reason. Maybe someone painted it there. um, but it is the game's way of refamiliarizing you with the tragedy that defines him, and also effective, not quite as effective as what we got in Arkham Asylum.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for reminding me. I couldn't quite remember the details between the 2 of them. It's been a minute, so
Yeah, sure. I replay those games alarmingly frequently, so it's that's all.
yeah. Well, I mean, you kinda have to. Like, they're just so good, and while we're waiting for whatever is coming next, I mean, you gotta go back to the classics.
Yeah, exactly.
So, be it the originals or the remastered and HD versions. I think this one stands out to me, to your point too, about, like, the verisimilitude of it and the visceralness of it, because what Snyder do and what Burton does, um, leans more into, like, the dreamlike aspect of it and throwing it into slow-mo, which are very beautiful to look at, and I appreciate how Snyder is, like, basically copying The Dark Knight Returns, just in live action, like, um, but I think that the suddenness of it, the rapidness of it makes you feel it more and makes it more intense, Um, but I mean, I don't think any of the movie versions have been bad. I'm trying to remember what the Forever one was, or if I'm just remembering the deleted scenes from Batman Forever where it deals with that. But like once we hit Gotham, I was like, I'm done seeing the Waynes die in live action.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad that the Batman just kind of glossed over that fact.
The depiction in Batman Forever is like the only remnant of what the driving force behind the title was.
Yeah.
They chopped it to hell and back, but he does recount the experience of the funeral, saying the preacher's words provided no comfort. He encountered
And
his
he's
dad's
running in
journal.
slow motion, right?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
and then he falls into the cave. Yeah, but we don't get the gigantic bat staring him in the face like we got in the trailers. We're still waiting on that. Mr. Zaslav, how about that? Let's bring that back.
I hear Warner Brothers could use some money.
Yeah, how about that, huh?
Yeah.
Maybe Batman can provide Warner Brothers with some money. What a novel idea.
He's done it before. Well, with that thought, we're going to take a quick pause from these messages from our sponsor. So, next we get to a small but crucial scene of Bruce being consoled by a young James Gordon at the police station. What does this act of kindness of Gordon putting a coat on Bruce mean for the events going forward?
I think it provides a really important baseline to establish how deep their relationship can go. I mean, honestly, like this detail, while I was watching the movie for the first time, was more disruptive to me than the change from a movie to an opera.
Oh,
Just because, like, even then, year one had stood as a personal, long time favorite Batman story. And Frank Miller decided to show the genesis of James Gordon a little bit differently with a personal history going back to like Chicago. And he arrives and he knows Gotham's reputation, of course, but being in Gotham as a cop is a little bit of a newer experience for him. And so the fact that Gordon has been a constant presence at the Gotham Police Department for as long as he has, it does a lot, I think, to establish Gordon's credibility as someone who knows the city and how well it operates, even before we see what happens later in the movie, where he is a direct witness to Flass's corruption. But the act of kindness in and of itself, it immediately streamlines the path of Bruce to Gordon when he is identifying a potential ally in his new pursuit. So that much I appreciate it the most for probably the narrative efficiency. And I mean, any Batman fan probably has pretty warm and fuzzy feelings when it comes to Jim Gordon. There is
yeah.
nothing wrong with pushing the button a little bit harder to get that going earlier and potentially for a more general audience. I think that that's really the key, is moving this into an adaptive philosophy that welcomes more general audience members into the world of Gotham City. Like, that's the key element that this moment serves in my mind, is making a declarative statement about how cool and how good a man Jim Gordon really is. Nothing wrong with that change. I think it's a really good and efficient way to show us who he is and how he approaches really such an impossible situation. That compassion that he shows really does define who he's going to be over the course of all of these movies, but it also just rings heavily familiar for anybody who knows Jim Gordon anyway, going into the movie.
And I like that we get a payoff to it 8 years later when the movie trilogy concludes. Like, there's a lot about Dark Knight Rises that connects back to this movie. And obviously, we know now that this wasn't anything that was, planned from the get go to be this way. But the fact that they brought it all in together at the end is it's a great piece of filmmaking. And we also get introduced to Commissioner Loeb in this scene. And as we just discussed, like, I know how familiar you are with year one. Um, so with that in mind, were you expecting him to be corrupt in this version? And how did that incarnation influence how you saw him in Begins? Were you waiting for the other shoe to drop?
Yeah, I was. It it I mean, my familiarity with the story with year one made me wonder if Loeb had some kind of an ulterior, not motive, but countenance, let's say, something that is
Mhm.
more open to the corruptive influence of the city. And in year one, that serves a very particular purpose. The beginning of Batman's time as a vigilante and Gordon coming up the ranks, still working scrappily elbows to elbows with patrolmen in a lot of cases. There was something necessary to overcome regarding institutional corruption. But the movie takes a little bit of a different approach by saying, look, the institutional corruption is there regardless of whether or not you have a pretty straight laced commissioner at the head of it. The movie instead says, the key difference maker for rooting this corruption out is going to be Batman. And in the original book, it's just another card in the stacked deck against both Batman and Gordon working against the tide of this natural corruption that seems to flow through Gotham at an institutional level. So once it became a little bit, once most of the runtime had elapsed, and I know I'm looking ahead a little bit here, but we got the sense that there's not really anything wrong with Loeb. Like that's okay.
Yeah.
Um, in a sense, my general philosophy when it comes to adapting the names of characters that we know is just like, well, if you're going to bother to assign the name, let's have a little bit of consistency. What does it really cost in the writing process to make the character familiar to his previous appearances? That's usually like, why not just come up with a different character if you're going to make someone totally different?
Yeah.
But that also makes the way that they use Loeb in the movie a little bit unexpected, which I was kind of charmed by. So overall, I was pretty pleased, and it didn't really count against anything. It was fine. So, uh, and it paid off a little bit more in the second movie in a way that I did find really rewarding. So that just justifies it even more.
I think I waited for that heel turn, like, the entire time, because Flash was very much, he may not have looked like him, but Flash was the Flash of the comic,
Yeah.
and, and so when we get to, the next movie and we see how he gets taken out, and he was never depicted as, like, corrupt, I was like, "Oh, okay. I guess I can stop having that in the back of my mind because now he's dead." So, that's just how this version is, so, uh, yeah. We catch up with Bruce next at his parents' funeral, and we get introduced to Mr. Earl, who is running Wayne Enterprises. And, for all we know, he's crying, but it's lost in the rain. Um, it was a subtle nod for you Blade Runner fans out there. But Bruce confesses all his guilt to Alfred. And did you see this scene when it aired as part of a special look during the Smallville season 4 finale?
I did. In fact, seeing Mr. Earl, I was like, oh God, it's Morgan Edge.
That's right. He was
so
also Morgan Edge very briefly in
very
Smallville at
briefly
this
in
time.
season 3, so not long before this movie came out. But yeah, I saw this moment, and again, it just like I remember feeling that it's just another thing to get efficiently out of the way. Like this is conceivably going to be a little bit of a hanging chad over um, Bruce's experiences going forward and the things that actually will help him define what his skills are going to be. Um, and it gives another element in the plot to fulfill by the end, because I was reasonably sure that we were going to get to a pretty familiar place regarding Bruce's place in the company by the time the credits rolled, but it's all about the journey, not just the destination. And setting things up here satisfied me even before I saw the movie itself, that they're not they're not shimmying away from any of the expected trappings that come with a Batman story. Or trappings is the wrong word, but the situation. Like, we expect Wayne Enterprises to be an important facilitator for what he is going to do.
Yeah.
And they're not brushing it aside. Like, if they're addressing it when he's a kid at this point in the story, it's probably going to play a bigger role over the rest of the movie. And that was a little bit of a relief to me, just because the depiction of Wayne Enterprises in the previous movies was pretty dubious at best. You know, it was very amorphous and nebulous. You don't really know too much about what the company does. The best real look at it that we got was in Batman Forever. And that was
The
a little bit
different
closer to,
divisions,
like,
yeah.
yeah, right. And it was, that might have been a little closer to the animated series conception, but you still didn't have a really great idea of what Wayne Enterprises was. And getting a deeper look at the company was an encouraging sign. And thankfully, later in the movie, we get an even better look at why they are titans of industry, so to speak.
And I brought it up with Bill during the prologue episode talking about the Smallville, special look. What really struck me about this scene was just how lonely and isolated Bruce was. Like, it's easy to conceptualize it, and see it on the comic page and know that, oh, he had a hard time growing up. But to see, like, this boy bring it, to real life, so to speak, and just how truly alone and how scary it would be, to basically, like, you're too he didn't really have any friends that we know of other than Rachel in this iteration, and to have his parents gone, and now, like, basically your employee is raising you. um I mean, I don't know, I just felt really bad for him in a way that I hadn't felt before or really thought about. um and this scene always just gets to me, and how loving Alfred is, and trying to assuage his guilt. And
Yeah, I
the narrative,
agree.
yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, no, that was it.
No, I mean, part of it too, I think it adds another dimension to what Alfred is trying to do for him, because that isolation is also probably a form of protection. You know, and I know I'm reading into it a little bit, but someone of that prominence, you know, there's probably a fair amount of opportunistic kinds of people that would try to get to him in that moment. And to me, it says a lot about Alfred's dedication and attention, that yeah, it is. He's keeping him sequestered, probably for his own good. But then the byproduct of that, of course, is loneliness, and navigating something so seismic is a challenge for anybody. I don't know. I don't care how old you are. It is extremely debilitating. So add on top of that the relative life inexperience of a 10-year-old boy, and that big house that's full of memories with every step, and the emptiness of your parents' rooms, and a lot of time to just be with your thoughts in a pretty sequestered environment, all things considered. There is this really stark sense of loneliness, and a humanistic perspective that the other movies just did not concern themselves with. You know, the brief glimpses that we got at the origin up to this point, um, they don't really do a lot outside of just, the shock of maybe learning about the circumstances of his parents' deaths. That we kind of go on the experience vicariously with Vicky for. Um, there's not a lot to be said about what the actual toll is on that child in the moment. A lot of backward extrapolation from what we see Bruce react to and respond to as Batman in the original movie, in particular in the '89 film. So here, putting the emotional weight of everything front and center, um, it gives you a sense that he might be kind of in the wilderness, but it also gives you a really important sense that the right person is with him to try to help him through it. And he's going to do as much as he possibly can to help Bruce navigate what is going to be a life-defining tragedy and trauma.
I don't know if you know this, but reading into things is what we do here on the chapter by chapter series. So you keep at it, sir. The narrative jumps back at this point to the present with adult Bruce talking to Ducard. And yes, we're still calling him Ducard at this point. Ducard asks if Bruce still feels responsible for his parents' death, and he reveals that his anger outweighs his guilt. While this Batman's fueled by anger, how does that rage compare to other cinematic versions for you?
I just don't feel like the anger was particularly palpable in the other movies. You know, I think we got a better look at that side of the driving force behind Batman in certain DCAU appearances up to that point, particularly Mask of the Phantasm, but certain episodes too. But cinematically, I agree with what Christian Bale had said in years following his portrayal of Batman, where he said that he had never seen Batman depicted as such a dangerous and volatile character as the movie's screenplay clearly pointed out that he was. And that's something that is key to the performance of Christian Bale as Batman. I mean, say what you will about maybe certain elements of that performance, but you get the sense that that smoldering rage is ever present. You know, the thing that really that kind of pushes that forward for me is when Ducard is actively, insulting him when they're doing the sword fight on the glacier, and he knocks Bruce down, and Bale just like throws this look of such smoldering rage at him that was legitimately like frightening when I first watched the movie. And I'd never seen that from a live action portrayal of Bruce Wayne before. Like Keaton had an unpredictable streak that he certainly pushed forward through his performance. Val Kilmer seemed very, very measured, and I never got like a sense of anger outside of like one moment in Batman Forever where he survives the fire, and there's that look.
Oh yeah,
where and he looks super pissed, and that was great. Like that was honestly one of my favorite moments in that movie. And then, anger was really nowhere to be found from Batman and Robin. So
he'd healed a lot by that point.
Sure, yeah, fair.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. But a younger Batman, you expect the rage to be a hallmark of what drives him. And Bale pushed that in a way that was so refreshing to me the first time I saw it, and continues to be kind of a hallmark of what makes his Bruce Wayne feel so emotionally real.
I think there's is we've definitely seen obviously the anger with Pattinson because he's vengeance, and obviously with Affleck, a lot of pent up rage. But with Christian Bale, like all that rage is definitely present. Like the story balances itself so well with the private Bruce, and we get these light moments with Alfred later on that provide that yin and yang and just make it feel more of a whole than other interpretations, like more of a well-rounded character. While he still has it hits in a different way than we see in future incarnations.
I agree. Yeah. And the rage is not like since it wasn't a defining attribute, but then I feel like by the time we got to the DCEU, they kind of overcorrected. You could argue that's consistent with Miller's depictions of Batman.
Yeah.
But the thing that I think separates the Dark Knight trilogy depiction of Batman's anger with the DCEU's version, at least early DCEU, is that it doesn't seem like DCEU Batman in like BVS. He's just kind of angry at the world, and it's understandable. It's just there's not an abundance of focus to his ire. There's a lot of paranoia about what Superman brings to the table, and he wants to try to protect from the otherworldly force that could destroy us under his thumb anytime that he wants to. But that doesn't do a lot to explain, at least for me, why he is so why his anger lacks such focus. It's just the totality of experiences up to that point. And the writing did a pretty good job of at least showing why he is angry, but the lack of focus, I think, makes it less interesting, unlike here, where it does seem like it has a focus and a purpose. And if any character, if any superhero generally can be described as defined by focus and purpose, probably Batman.
Probably Batman. Yeah. And as we continue with the scene, Ducard begins instructing Bruce, revealing the tricks in the trade he's going to deploy as Batman. And we kind of talked about this. Ducard says, "Your parents' death was not your fault. It was your father's." How did this dialogue strike you in the marketing leading up to the movie? And what's your takeaway from having it in context now of the film proper?
I was shocked the first time I heard it.
Yeah.
Because very few people talk to him like that. And granted, he's not Batman yet. And we knew that he wasn't going to be Batman yet by the time the line was uttered, or at least had a pretty reasonable expectation that he wasn't going to be Batman yet. There was just such callousness behind it that I was shocked, and I was sure that the response to such a statement was going to be pretty extreme from Bruce. The full context of the scene up to that point, I mean, I already talked about the look that he flashed when Ducard fought him off after saying this. Just how consumed he was with rage felt appropriate and truthful to the guy that I know. And I thought it presented a good opportunity for the training to turn a corner and to get us closer to the ultimate destination. That seems to me to be a pretty pivotal turning point in what the movie depicts as the genesis of Batman. And it teaches him an important lesson about about how unfocused rage works against you. Because say what you will about Ducard, or whom we know him to be, but he is a pretty good teacher, and he is intimately familiar with a similar brand of rage, as will become clear in just a few minutes from this point in the movie. So I appreciated the lesson, because I feel like that's a lesson that's really important for someone like Batman to have learned before he becomes Batman, if he is going to be as measured a force for good as I think he will end up wanting to be.
When I first heard that line in the trailers, I thought they were suggesting that maybe some other reason was going to be their cause of death. And it intrigued me to no end of what that could be. Like, what are they going to change? Like, we've already seen, like the prior movies where things got changed. Like, it wasn't, letter of the law. So, going into it, I was wondering, like, what could possibly be transpiring. And then we get to the scene and it's like, oh, okay. It's nothing nearly as drastic as I thought. It was more of a point of view. of what really caused the Waynes to be murdered and who, the blame should go to. So I thought it was a great line of dialogue that's memorable and, like you pointed out, pushes Bruce forward. And it's just this whole sequence right here is just one of my favorite parts of the film. And as they're sparring crescendos, Bruce fails to heed his mentor and gets knocked down below the ice, which concludes this chapter for us. So, talk to me about the tactical aspect of this scene and what it means to see Bruce literally fall once again.
It's just more for him to overcome, you know? I mean, at the end of the day, some of the biggest value that I derive from constant exposure to Batman stories and choosing to constantly expose myself to Batman stories is the way that he does overcome challenges as someone who only has his wits and the strength that he has worked for to get through it. Um, that to me speaks to the core essential nature of what makes Batman such an exceptional character and hero is his resourcefulness and his ability to take these disadvantages and turn them into learning moments so that he can plan ahead for them later and throw it right back into the face of whomever he's facing off against. So I certainly didn't expect us to get to that fully formed figure at this point in the story. So I just took it as a moment for him to understand how to plan against it later. And that just goes to the heart of who he is and what he's all about. So um, it seemed like it served a very particular purpose. And because it presented that challenge and that fall in such a way that, um, it was a little disorienting, I think, by nature, because the character was experiencing disorientation at the time, too. Uh, the emotional transference from the camera to the viewer, I think, was very much on point. But he needs to have this struggle because um, he knows that he is not going to be able to really rest on any laurels, despite how skilled he's become. Before this point, the movie did a good job of establishing that despite that, he's still not complete yet. And having that additional challenge really crystallizes that there's a little ways to go, but we're getting there. We're getting to the destination, and it's pretty awesome to watch unfold.
Yeah, and I think too, by having the act of him falling again, it calls back to the why do we fall so we can learn to pick ourselves up. And we constantly get reminded of that throughout this film and even in Rises to a degree. And if you were to ask my kids, like, what's something your dad always says or quotes, for sure in the top 5 would be always mind your surroundings, because I've constantly been telling them that their entire life to have situational awareness. And, now that they're of driving age, it's even like more prevalent to be like, hey, mind your surroundings, look both ways. It's ingrained in being a parent. You teach your kid when they start playing in the front yard, look both ways before you cross the street. And that, this line has always come in handy in those situations. And not only that, but then we get that recall of it at the end as well. And it keeps striking me like how much of this movie, like, everything gets brought around to the end, brought back in the end and brought full circle. And then they do it again at the end of the trilogy. And it's just in this age of churning out content, it's nice to have something that has a structure and a meaning, and characters and plot are driving everything forward to a conclusion. And for sure, this whole training montage is one of my favorite parts of the movie. And I say that, but it's like pretty much every part of this movie is practically my favorite part of the movie. Maybe not like when Falcone and Scarecrow are in Arkham. Like I could skip that, but it's not a bad scene by any stretch. It's still really good. But that's going to do it for this chapter, for chapter 2. Where can people find you, Chris?
Oh, well, thanks again for the invitation, man. I really appreciate it. And people are welcome to check in with me primarily on the Comic Binge alongside yourself and our partner, Paul Herman, with Knights Never Die, the issue by issue exploration of Grant Morrison's run on Batman, run that you had never seen before. And I don't think you're likely to ever see anything like it again. It's extremely unique and personal favorite. And I think we're having a lot of fun diving into each issue as they individually come out. We are a little bit on a hiatus for Discovery Debrief, a Star Trek podcast, but in a little over a month's time from when we're recording this, we have a very good reason to get back together, and that's season 3 of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. It's finally coming out. It's been a long time coming. We weren't sure if it was even going to come back because the second season ended on a cliffhanger right as the writer's strike was going on and the actor's strike. So we were not sure what the future was going to hold, but the show's 3rd season is coming. The 4th season is actively being shot right now, so it's got a bit of a future in front of it, thankfully, and it's an excellent show that I can't recommend enough. Other than that, you can find me on some social media platforms. The one I probably check in most frequently on, which is still not that frequent, is Blue Sky. If you search my name out, I'm sure you can find me. But yeah, just keep on keeping on. And I'm sure that at some point over the next month or so, you'll be able to hear me talk about another favorite DC Comics iconic superhero who is making a triumphant return to movie theaters very soon.
Well, let's hope so. Third time's the charm.
Yeah.
Would you call this the 3rd time?
Yeah, probably. I mean,
yeah.
Third attempt at the character coming back, probably. Yeah.
Yeah.
No pressure.
Oh, yeah. No pressure at all on this movie. It's not like an entire universe or studio is writing on it. So
no, not at all.
Yeah. But this looks like a job for Superman. Let's hope so. Anyways, obviously, if you are here, you can find me at batmanonfilm.com. Don't forget the dashes. Doing chapter by chapter for Batman Begins, Batman Animation, and writing comic reviews for Batman and Robin, the excellent Batman and Robin Year 1 by Mark Waid, and Catwoman as well. So you can go to BOF proper for all of that content and the YouTube channel as well. Also on YouTube, Up to Speed with Wally West, I have a Flash podcast where I'm breaking down each issue. And then the 007 files, if you happen to like James Bond. And I would say James Bond in its current iteration owes a lot to Batman Begins, at least from a cinematic standpoint. You can hear me talk all things Bond over there with my 2 co-hosts. And got some exciting news on that front as well, because we have a new video game coming out. I mean, it's been coming out for 5 years, but now we have a title, we've seen footage, and we have a general release date of 2026. So a lot to be excited about for us over there.
Definitely. You'll have to share with me how you feel about the developer's last foray whenever you have a chance.
Yes, it just arrived yesterday from Friendly Neighborhood Amazon truck, so excellent. Hopefully I'll get to it tonight. Well, that is going to do it for this time out. Thank you so much for listening, and announcer Rachel will take us out.
You have been listening to Batman on Film Chapter by Chapter, a BatmanOnFilm.com podcast revisiting the cinematic adventures of the Dark Knight, scene by scene, chapter by chapter. Follow Jet on Twitter at Batman on Film. For BOF news only, follow at the Batman on Film on Twitter. To become a BOF patron, go to patreon.com/BatmanOnFilm. To advertise on BOF, visit advertisecast.com/BatmanOnFilm. For Jet and Team BOF, I'm announcer Rachel. Authoritative, definitive, the original, Batman on Film, established in 1998.
Batman flying night sky. Jet had a dream, now we're flying high. Since 98, it's been online. All the Bat fans gather and shine. Dark nights and Gotham tales, rockets with stories and never fail. We love the Bat, right from the start. Batman on film, straight to our heart. Jets on the mission, spreading the word. Every Bat flick, every unheard. Classic tales and brand new Batman movies bring shades of blue. From the Joker's laugh to the hero's call, Batman time, standing tall. We love the Bat, right from the start. Batman on film, straight to our heart. That family full of cheer. Since 98, we feel the thrill, keeping the Bat vibes alive still. We love the Bat, right from the start. Batman on film, straight to our heart.